June 1872, Hollow Creek, Colorado Territory. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Catherine Lowell stood on the weathered porch of the only home she had ever known, a modest two-room cabin her late husband had built with his own hands. At 22 years old, she was already a widow of 11 months, her golden blonde hair shimmering in the sunlight as she clutched the deed to her property with trembling fingers. Her pale blue dress, once her Sunday best but now worn daily as her options dwindled, fluttered in the mountain breeze. "You cannot live on pride alone, Mrs. Lowell," Mr. Hollister, the general store owner, had told her just yesterday. His words still stung. Catherine had come to believe that the frontier was where dreams perished, not where they flourished. James had promised her the world when they married 3 years ago, but all he had left her was a cabin full of memories and debts that mounted with each passing day. The frontier, she had decided, was no place for a woman alone. It devoured the weak and isolated the strong until they too became prey. What she wanted, needed, was escape. Return east to civilization, to her cousin's home in Philadelphia, where she might find respectable work as a seamstress or companion. What she had was this cabin, 4 hens that hardly laid, and winter approaching faster than her dwindling supplies could withstand. From the ridge above Catherine's homestead, Kyle Lawson adjusted his Stetson to shield his eyes from the glaring sun. At 24, he already had 5 years of cattle driving behind him, his lean frame hardened by long days in the saddle. His clean-shaven jaw clenched as he observed the widow's property below. Dark brown hair curled slightly at his collar, and his green eyes narrowed in assessment rather than judgment. The Broken Spoke Ranch had sent him to survey potential grazing expansion, but Kyle found himself lingering longer than necessary. He had seen the widow Lowell in town occasionally, noticed how she kept to herself, head held high despite the whispers that followed her. He admired her pride, even as he wondered how long it would sustain her. Kyle had learned young that attachment was the quickest route to heartbreak out west. His father's death from typhoid when Kyle was 14, and his mother's subsequent decline had taught him that loving meant losing. Better to keep moving, stay useful, avoid routes that would only be torn up by the next drought or disaster. The Broken Spoke was just his latest stop, never a home, just employment. Yet something about the solitary figure on that porch made him pause his horse longer than was prudent. 2 days later, Catherine stood in Madame Renault's dress emporium, her heart racing as she placed her cabin deed on the polished counter. "I wish to make a trade," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "My property for your finest wedding gown and enough funds for passage to Philadelphia." Madame Renault, a shrewd Frenchwoman who had followed the mining boom west, raised a penciled eyebrow. "A wedding gown? Have your fiancé hidden away, Mrs. Lowell?" Catherine's cheeks flushed. "No, but I have a cousin in Philadelphia who writes that eligible men of means seek proper wives." With a gown like that, she nodded toward the magnificent ivory silk creation in the window, adorned with Brussels lace and tiny pearl buttons, "I could present myself appropriately." What Catherine didn't say was that the dress represented her last hope. In it, perhaps she would be seen as more than a pitiful frontier widow. Perhaps she could begin again, be valued for more than her ability to endure hardship. "Your cabin is worth considerably more than a dress, my dear," Madame Renault said carefully, studying Catherine's face. "Even with passage money included." "I need to leave before winter," Catherine replied simply. "The dress is my future, the cabin is only my past." From his position near the haberdashery across the street, Kyle watched the exchange through Madame Renault's front window. He had come to town for supplies and caught sight of Catherine entering the dress shop. Something about her determined stride had captured his attention. "Trading her home," he muttered in disbelief as he pieced together the conversation from their gestures, "for a wedding dress." "Widow Lowell's got no choice," the elderly clerk beside him commented, having noticed Kyle's interest. "Winter's coming and word is she's down to her last dollars. That cabin's too remote for a woman alone, anyhow. Better she goes back east where she belongs." Kyle felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. "That's her decision to make." The clerk chuckled. "Well, Madame Renault will make a fine profit either way. That land adjoins Broken Spoke Range, doesn't it? Your boss would pay triple what it's worth." The realization hit Kyle like a physical blow. Of course, that's why Mr. Thornton, the ranch owner, had been so interested in his assessment of the Lowell property. The widow wasn't just fighting isolation, she was surrounded by people waiting for her to fail. 3 days later, Catherine stood in Madame Renault's back room, surrounded by mirrors that reflected a stranger wearing the most beautiful gown she had ever seen. The ivory silk complemented her fair complexion, while the fitted bodice emphasized her slender waist before cascading into a modest train. "You look like a bride," Madame Renault said, genuine admiration in her voice. "A real Philadelphia bride." Catherine blinked back tears. "Then it is worth my cabin." "The papers are prepared," Madame confirmed. "Sign and the dress is yours, along with your stage ticket and $50. Catherine's hand hovered over the document. Once she signed, her last connection to James would be severed. The home he had built, promised would be their future, gone. But what choice did she have? A woman couldn't work the land alone, couldn't defend it, couldn't survive the isolation. The bell above the shop door jingled, and Madame Renault excused herself. Catherine studied her reflection once more. Would this gamble pay off? Or was she trading one impossible situation for another? Mrs. Lowell, the deep voice startled her from her thoughts. In the mirror, she saw a tall cowboy standing in the doorway, hat in hand. She recognized him vaguely from town, one of the broken spoke hands. "This is a private fitting," she said, turning to face him. "Kyle Lawson, ma'am." He kept his eyes respectfully on her face. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I heard about the trade you're considering." Catherine lifted her chin. "My affairs are not the concern of strangers, Mr. Lawson." "No, ma'am, they're not," he agreed, his green eyes serious. "But I believe you're being offered far less than your property is worth." Her eyes narrowed. "By whose estimation?" "By anyone who knows that the broken spoke wants your land for water rights. Madame Renault is working with them. They'll pay her triple what she's paying you." Catherine's world seemed to tilt. "How do you know this?" "Because I work for them, and I was sent to survey your land last week." His direct gaze never wavered. "I didn't know then what they planned." "I do now." Catherine struggled to process this information. "Why are you telling me this? Why betray your employer?" Kyle shifted his weight, discomfort evident in his stance. "Because my pa taught me that right is right, no matter who it costs, and this isn't right." Before Catherine could respond, Madame Renault returned, her expression darkening at the sight of Kyle. "Mr. Lawson, this is highly inappropriate. Mrs. Lowell is in the middle of a private business transaction." "A transaction based on deception," Kyle replied evenly. "Mrs. Lowell should know that the broken spoke will pay $1,500 for her land." "How much are you offering her, madame?" The Frenchwoman's face flushed with anger. "I am offering fair market value for a widow's failing homestead." "You're offering a dress, a ticket, and $50 for property worth 30 times that," Kyle countered, then turned to Catherine. "Mrs. Lowell, I have no right to advise you, but please don't sign anything today." Catherine looked between them, her mind racing. "I think I need some air," she said finally, gathering her skirts. "Madame, I will return tomorrow with my decision." Outside in the crisp autumn air, Catherine walked swiftly, her thoughts in turmoil. Kyle Lawson followed at a respectful distance. "Why would you risk your position to help me?" she asked when they had reached the edge of town. "Because I've seen too many good people pushed off their land," he replied, "and because you deserve better than being manipulated when you're vulnerable." His straightforward answer disarmed her. For 11 months, Catherine had faced every crisis alone, received every piece of advice with suspicion, knowing it usually served someone else's interests. This man had nothing to gain and everything to lose by warning her. "Thank you," she said simply, "but it doesn't change my situation. I cannot manage that land alone." "Have you considered taking on a partner?" Kyle suggested. "Someone to work the land while you keep ownership." Catherine laughed bitterly. What reputable man would partner with a widow with no dowry, no family connections, and I would never consider anything improper. "There are decent men looking for opportunity, not impropriety," Kyle said quietly. "Men who would work for a fair share of the harvest, not ownership." For the first time in months, Catherine felt a flicker of possibility. "Do you know of such men?" "I might," he said, a slight smile warming his features. "If you'd be willing to consider the arrangement." That conversation began what Catherine would later call her education in frontier survival. Over the next 2 weeks, Kyle Lawson proved himself a surprising ally. He introduced her to Sam Jenkins, a reliable older man who agreed to sharecrop her fields in exchange for a small cabin Kyle helped them build on the property. He showed her how to repair her leaking roof, how to reinforce her chicken coop against predators, and how to negotiate fair prices for her eggs in town. "Why are you helping me?" she asked one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "You lost your position at Broken Spoke over this." Kyle shrugged. "Mr. Thornton wasn't pleased I interfered, but he didn't fire me. I quit. Didn't sit right, working for a man who'd take advantage that way." "Still, you've done so much." "Maybe I needed the reminder that not all problems are solved by moving on," he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "That sometimes staying and facing challenges is the braver choice." Catherine studied his profile, seeing beyond his handsome features to the character beneath. "Is that what you've done?" "Moved on when things got difficult." "Since I was 16, he admitted. "After my folks died, I took to the trail. New town every season, new ranch every year, kept me from getting attached." "And now?" His eyes met hers. "Now I'm wondering if I've been running from the wrong things." The air between them changed, charged with something neither was ready to name. Catherine looked away first. "I should check on the biscuits." As autumn deepened toward winter, Catherine found herself looking forward to Kyle's daily visits. He had taken temporary work at the livery in town, but spent most evenings at her cabin, teaching her the skills James had never thought to share. She learned to shoot straight, to mend fence, to recognize which clouds meant snow and which meant passing rain. More than the practical education, Catherine treasured their conversations. Kyle carried no expectations of her grief, didn't require her to be either the tragic widow or miraculously recovered. He simply met her where she was each day, offering quiet companionship or respectful distance as needed. "You know," she said one afternoon as they repaired her barn door, "I never thought I would laugh again after James died. Especially not out here." Kyle handed her another nail. "Frontier living teaches you to find joy in small moments, otherwise the hardship overwhelms." "Is that why you stayed a drifter?" "To avoid the hardship of attachment." His hand stilled, partly. When you love something, losing it hurts worse than never having it at all. "I disagree," Catherine said softly. "Having loved James, however briefly, gave me memories that sustained me through grief. Emptiness would have been far worse." Kyle considered this. "Maybe that's the difference between us. You see the value in what was. I only see what was lost. Perhaps we both have something to learn, then." Their eyes met, and Catherine felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the physical labor. For the first time since James's death, she recognized the stirring of possibility, not just of survival, but of a future that might hold more than endurance. The town's harvest festival in late October marked a turning point. Catherine had not intended to attend. Such celebrations seemed frivolous given her circumstances, but Kyle's gentle persistence convinced her. "The community needs to see you as more than the widow Lowell," he argued. "And you need to remember there's life beyond your property line." She wore her blue Sunday dress, freshly pressed, and allowed Kyle to escort her into town. The main street had been transformed with lanterns and hay bales, a fiddle player's lively tune drawing couples to dance despite the chill in the air. "Mrs. Lowell," Reverend Peterson greeted her warmly. "How wonderful to see you joining us. And Mr. Lawson, I understand you've been helping with repairs at the Lowell place." "Yes, sir," Kyle replied respectfully. "Mrs. Lowell is determined to make her homestead thrive." "Admirable indeed," the Reverend smiled at Catherine. "Your late husband would be proud of your perseverance, my dear." Catherine tensed at the mention of James, but managed a polite nod. "Thank you, Reverend." As they moved through the crowd, Catherine noticed the curious glances and whispers. Kyle's hand at her elbow remained steady, a silent support against the scrutiny. "People will talk," she murmured. "A widow spending so much time with a single man." "Let them," Kyle replied simply. "We know the truth of it." But what was the truth? Catherine wondered as they joined a circle dance. Their hands met and parted in the pattern of the dance, each touch sending a flutter through her chest that both thrilled and frightened her. Was this merely friendship born of circumstance, or something neither of them had anticipated? The answer came unexpectedly when Madame Renault appeared before them as the music ended, her expression cold. Mrs. Lowell, I see you've found alternative arrangements. Her gaze swept dismissively over Kyle. Though I question their propriety. Kyle stiffened beside her, but Catherine spoke first. Mr. Lawson has been a friend when I most needed one, madame, something you pretended to be while plotting to swindle me. Madame Renault's eyes narrowed. Careful, my dear, frontier towns thrive on reputation. Yours is already precarious as a woman living alone, now entertaining a drifter with no roots or reputation. That's enough, Kyle said quietly, his voice carrying a steel edge Catherine had never heard before. The truth often is, Madame replied smoothly. Did he tell you about his past, Mrs. Lowell, about why he never stays in one place? Perhaps you should ask him about Austin, Texas, before you trust him further. With that parting shot, she glided away, leaving a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Kyle, Catherine turned to him, finding his expression shuddered in a way it hadn't been in weeks. Not here, he said tersely. I'll take you home. The ride back to her cabin was silent, tension radiating from Kyle's rigid posture in the saddle. Catherine's mind raced with possibilities, each darker than the last. What had he done in Austin? Was he running from the law, from another woman? At her porch, Kyle finally spoke. I should have told you before. You deserve to know who was helping you. Then tell me now, she said, wrapping her shawl tighter against the night chill. Kyle removed his hat, turning it in his hands. 5 years ago, I was a deputy in Austin. Young, proud, thought I knew everything about justice. He took a deep breath. There was a man, Carter Mills, wealthy rancher, powerful friends. He beat his wife regularly, but no one would stand against him. Catherine waited, sensing there was more. One night she came to the jail, beaten so badly she could barely stand. I took her statement, promised protection. His voice grew hollow, but the sheriff was in Mills's pocket. He told Mills where she was hiding. Mills killed her, and when I tried to arrest him, the sheriff claimed I was conspiring with her, that we were lovers planning to frame Mills. That's absurd, Catherine breathed. Doesn't matter. Mills had influence. I was given a choice, leave Texas forever or face murder charges myself. The bitterness in his voice cut deep. I chose to run, been running ever since. Couldn't save her, couldn't get justice. What good was staying? Catherine absorbed his story, understanding washing over her. So you never stay because you don't trust justice will prevail. You don't trust the communities you serve. I trust what I've seen, that power protects power, and good intentions mean nothing against it. Kyle finally met her eyes. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to know I was a coward. A coward, Catherine stepped closer. You risked everything to help a stranger. You stood up to the broken spoke, to Madame Renault for me. Those aren't the actions of a coward, Kyle. I ran once, I'll likely run again, that's my nature. No, Catherine said firmly, that's your fear. There's a difference. He stared at her, vulnerability raw in his expression. I don't know how to stop running. Perhaps by recognizing what's worth staying for, she whispered. The moment hung between them, fragile and charged. Then Kyle stepped back, settling his hat on his head. I should go, give you time to think about whether you want someone like me helping you. Before Catherine could respond, he was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the night. 3 days passed without word from Kyle. Catherine threw herself into work, winterizing the chicken coop, storing preserves, reviewing the ledger where she tracked expenses and income. The numbers were improving, but her spirits were not. On the 4th day, a knock at her door revealed Sheriff Daniels, his expression grave. Mrs. Lowell, may I come in? Catherine's heart raced as she invited him inside. Is something wrong, Sheriff? I'm afraid there's been some trouble, ma'am. He removed his hat. Kyle Lawson was found badly beaten on the road to Denver yesterday. He's at Doc Miller's now. The room seemed to tilt. What happened? 3 men jumped him, broken spoke hands. They claim he stole from the ranch before quitting, but the sheriff hesitated. Between us, I think Mr. Thornton didn't appreciate Lawson interfering with his plans for your property. Is he? Catherine couldn't finish the question. He's alive, ma'am. Busted ribs, broken arm, nasty gash on his head. Doc says he'll heal, but it'll take time. Catherine was already reaching for her shawl. I need to go to him. Mrs. Lowell, the sheriff said carefully, there's something else you should know. Those men, they said they were sending a message. Not just to Lawson, but to anyone who might help you keep your land. The threat was clear. Catherine's hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. Then I'll need to send a message of my own, Sheriff. No one will intimidate me off my land. At the doctor's small infirmary, Catherine found Kyle conscious but heavily bandaged. His left arm was splinted, and a purpling bruise spread across his right cheekbone. He looked younger somehow, vulnerability replacing his usual quiet confidence. "Catherine," he murmured when he saw her, "you shouldn't be here." "This is exactly where I should be." She pulled a chair beside his bed. "The sheriff told me what happened." Thornton's message, subtle wasn't it? Despite everything, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Catherine fought back tears. "This is my fault. If you hadn't helped me—" "No," Kyle interrupted, wincing as he tried to sit up straighter. "This is the consequence of standing against men like Thornton. It's why I usually keep moving." "And now? Will you run again once you heal?" She couldn't keep the fear from her voice. Kyle was quiet for a long moment. "I should, for both our sakes." His good hand sought hers. "But I find I don't want to, Catherine." "Not anymore." The confession hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to fully voice. "Then don't," she whispered. "Stay, help me fight this." "They'll come after you next," he warned. "Thornton wants that land. He won't stop because of one beaten cowboy." Catherine straightened her spine. "Then we'll need a better strategy than just enduring, won't we?" Over the next 2 weeks, as Kyle recuperated in the doctor's spare room, Catherine put her plan into motion. She visited every homesteader within 10 miles, sharing what had happened and warning them of Thornton's tactics. She wrote letters to the territorial governor and federal land office, documenting the intimidation. Most significantly, she approached the newspaper editor in the neighboring town of Silver Creek, who was known for his crusades against corruption. "Mrs. Lowell," Joseph Barnes said after hearing her story, "you understand that printing this will make you even more of a target." "I'm already a target, Mr. Barnes. The difference is, after your article, everyone will know why." The exposé appeared the following week. "Broken spoke empire built on intimidation. Widow stands firm against land grab." Barnes had interviewed other small landowners who had been forced to sell under similar circumstances, creating a damning portrait of Thornton's expansion tactics. The response was immediate and divided. Some townspeople avoided Catherine completely, fearing Thornton's retaliation. Others, particularly those who had lost land or loved ones to similar schemes, offered quiet support, extra supplies, volunteer labor, watchful eyes. By the time Kyle was strong enough to leave the doctor's care, a small community had formed around Catherine's resistance. Sheriff Daniels, shamed by the public attention, began patrolling the road near her property regularly. Sam Jenkins, her sharecropper, brought his 2 grown sons to stay on the property as additional security. "You've started a rebellion," Kyle said with wondering admiration as Catherine helped him settle into Jenkins's old cabin, which they had determined was safer than him returning to town lodgings. "I've simply refused to be a victim," she replied, "something I learned from you." Kyle caught her hand as she adjusted his pillow. "Catherine, when I'm healed, when this is over with Thornton, we need to talk about what happens next." Her heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm tired of running. I want roots, a purpose." His green eyes held her steadily. "I want to build something lasting, and I can't imagine doing that anywhere you're not." Catherine's breath caught. "Kyle." A shout from outside interrupted them. Sam Jenkins was calling for Kyle. Riders coming, 6 of them broken-spoke men. Kyle struggled to his feet, grimacing at the pain in his still-healing ribs. Catherine handed him his gun belt. "Stay inside," he ordered, but Catherine was already reaching for the rifle above the door. "This is my fight too," she reminded him. Outside, they found Sam and his sons positioned strategically around the property. The approaching riders slowed as they recognized the reception awaiting them. "That's Thornton himself in front," Kyle murmured. "This isn't good." Catherine squared her shoulders as the rancher pulled his horse to a stop at her gate. Richard Thornton was an imposing figure, silver-haired, barrel-chested, with cold eyes that assessed Catherine like she was livestock to be appraised. "Mrs. Lowell," he called, "I thought it time we spoke directly, woman to man, instead of through intermediaries and newspaper editors." "You mean instead of through hired thugs," Catherine replied clearly, her rifle visible but not aimed. Thornton's expression tightened. "I had nothing to do with what happened to Lawson." overzealous employees acting without authorization. A convenient excuse, Kyle said, stepping forward despite his injuries. Just like I'm sure you had nothing to do with Madame Renault trying to swindle Mrs. Lowell's property. Business is business, Thornton replied dismissively. Mrs. Lowell, I'm prepared to offer you $2,000 for your land, far above market value. Enough to return east in comfort. Catherine felt a flutter of temptation. It was a substantial sum, more than she had hoped for even before Kyle's intervention. She could start fresh, without fear or constant struggle. But then she looked at the land around her, the home James had built, the fields they had planted together, the future they had dreamed of. And beside her stood Kyle, a man who had risked everything to help her keep it. My land is not for sale, Mr. Thornton, she said firmly, not at any price. Thornton's face darkened. Don't be foolish, woman, winter's coming. You can't work this land alone, and your hired help won't stick around once the snow flies. I'm not alone, Catherine replied. And this community has shown me that standing together is stronger than running scared. Community? Thornton laughed coldly. Look around you, a crippled ex-deputy, an old man, and 2 boys. That's your community. As if in answer, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. Coming up the road were at least a dozen riders, homesteaders, shopkeepers, and farmers from the surrounding area, led by Sheriff Daniels and Joseph Barnes. Actually, Kyle said with quiet satisfaction, that's just part of it. The sheriff rode forward. Everything all right here, Mrs. Lowell. Just a business discussion, Sheriff, Catherine replied, never taking her eyes off Thornton. Mr. Thornton was leaving. Thornton's gaze swept over the gathered crowd, assessing the shift in power. His jaw tightened as he realized how many witnesses were present and how the story would spread if he pushed further. This isn't over, he said quietly, for Catherine's ears alone. Winter has broken stronger wills than yours. Then spring will find me still standing, she replied. As Thornton and his men rode away, the tension broke. Catherine's neighbors dismounted, offering congratulations and support. Sheriff Daniels explained how Barnes had organized the show of force after hearing rumors of Thornton's planned visit. You've given people courage, Mrs. Lowell, the newspaper editor, told her. Sometimes that's all it takes to change things, one person willing to stand firm. Catherine's eyes found Kyle's across the yard. Or 2 people, she corrected softly. That evening, after the impromptu gathering had dispersed, Catherine and Kyle sat on her porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. The first snow would come soon, they could smell it in the air. He's right about one thing, Kyle said. Winter will be the real test. Catherine nodded, but we'll face it prepared. The root cellar is full, the woodpile stocked. Sam and his boys have the north field ready for spring planting. She glanced at him. The question is, will you be here to see it bloom? Kyle turned to face her fully. Catherine, I'm done running. These past weeks, watching you fight for this land, it's shown me what courage really looks like. He took her hand in his. I want to be part of whatever you're building here. If you'll have me. As my hired hand, she asked, her heart racing, if that's what you need. His thumb traced circles on her palm, but I hope eventually as more. Catherine looked at the man before her, battered but unbowed, his integrity tested and proven. In Kyle she saw not just the strength to survive the frontier, but the heart to make it a home. I still have that wedding dress, she said softly. Never did sign it over to Madame Renault. Kyle's smile bloomed slowly, transforming his face. Are you proposing to me, Catherine Lowell? I'm proposing we stop being afraid of what we might lose, she replied, and start building what we want to keep. His kiss was gentle, mindful of his healing injuries, but filled with promise. Catherine leaned into it, feeling for the first time since James's death that her heart was truly her own to give again. Winter arrived with fury 3 weeks later, but found the Lowell homestead prepared. The marriage took place on Christmas Eve in the town church, with Reverend Peterson officiating and half the community in attendance. Catherine wore the ivory silk gown that had once represented escape, but now symbolized new beginnings. Kyle stood tall beside her despite his still healing arm, his eyes never leaving her face as they spoke their vows. In the front pew, Sam Jenkins wiped away tears unashamedly, while Joseph Barnes took notes for what he promised would be the finest wedding announcement the territory has seen. Richard Thornton's attempts to isolate them through the winter months failed as neighbors made regular visits, checking on the newlyweds and bringing small gifts for their home. By spring, when Catherine discovered she was expecting their first child, Thornton had turned his attention to easier acquisitions further north. "He'll be back someday," Kyle said as they planted the garden together, his arm finally healed enough for heavy work. "Men like that don't forget being defied." "And we'll be ready," Catherine replied, resting her hand on her slightly rounded belly. "But not alone, never alone again." Kyle pulled her gently into his arms. "You know, when I watched you walk into Madame Renault's shop that day, ready to trade everything for a chance to escape, I thought you were making a terrible mistake." "I was," Catherine agreed with a smile. "But it led me to you." "No," Kyle corrected, brushing a strand of golden hair from her face. "It led us both home." As summer bloomed across their flourishing fields, Catherine often thought about how close she had come to leaving. The frontier remained harsh, unpredictable, demanding, but no longer seemed like a place where dreams perished. Instead, standing beside Kyle as they built their future day by day, she recognized it as fertile ground where love, like their carefully tended crops, could take root and flourish against all odds. The wedding dress hung preserved in their bedroom, no longer representing desperate escape, but instead the moment they had both stopped running and found home in each other's courage.